This is the Ag Engineering Podcast, where we talk tools, tips, and techniques to improve the sustainability of your farm. I am your host, Andy Chamberlain from the University of Vermont Extension, and this podcast is supported by Northeast SARE. Thanks for listening. Now, let's get started. In today's episode, I'm sharing with you a bit of a review. I recently completed the annual progress report for this project and thought, why not share these stats with the audience? I like to know the behind the scenes and how stuff works, and thought you might as well. So, to get started, I launched this podcast in December 2019, and since then we've published over 50 episodes, capturing over 14,500 downloads. The podcast has interviewed over 13 farmers and 4 ag service providers, and the most popular content was episode number 2, which was titled Managing Multiple Sales Channels with Jake and Taylor of Footprint Farm. That episode alone right now currently has over 440 downloads. Now, I will say that podcasts truly are evergreen content as people are going back and listening to previous episodes. Old episodes continue to receive plays, and some of the most popular episodes are those earliest ones that we've put out. I don't think it's just because the quality has declined ever since the first few episodes, rather than I think that people are going back and listening to previous ones and digesting more info. Now, I've been trying to keep this podcast as a short-form, topic-centered podcast, and in doing so, the episodes have ranged from just under 6 minutes sharing a marketing tip to a 45-minute episode discussing practices of no-till farming. I will say no-till farming, coolers, and cat tunnels are some of the more popular topics, and 89% of the listeners are listening from their mobile phone. Of those mobile phone users, 68% of those are on iPhones. Now, where are the rest of the listeners coming from? Well, the way podcasting works is the episode audio files is uploaded to a website, and that website is called the host. We're using a host called Buzzsprout. Then that host that's holding your audio file syndicates or distributes these across many different websites and players, most of these being mobile apps. So aside from Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Spotify, which are the top 3, there are many other players that you can also find our show on. That could be Overcast, Google Podcasts, Podbean, CastBox, Apple iTunes, iHeartRadio, Pocket Cast, Podcast Addict, Deezer, Pandora, BeyondPod, Bullhorn, Amazon Music, and TuneIn Radio. You can also listen to the show via Buzzsprout Player, right embedded on our website. People are listening all over the world, reaching 38 different countries. That's one of the benefits of podcasts as opposed to like an in-person workshop, as you can listen anywhere in the world. And not surprisingly, 94% of listeners are from North America. What is interesting to see is that I remain to have a strong Vermont audience, and as the top 2 most popular cities are South Burlington and Colchester, Vermont, bringing in 361 and 271 downloads from each of those towns. So thanks, neighbors, for listening to the show. I think maybe the Northeast SARE office, which is in South Burlington, are all listening to it to figure out what's going on here with some of their funding. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but thanks, South Burlington, for checking us out. The next most popular city is Columbus, Ohio, with 238 downloads in that city. And the stats say that I have listeners from over 1,444 different cities. In order to know how many subscribers I have, you need to gather that data from every one of those podcast players that I listed, and they don't always share their subscribers or download stats. So Buzzsprout does their best estimate and bases that off your average downloads for your episodes over the first 90 days of being published. On average, it estimates I have a regular audience of about 265 people. To put that in perspective, that's like a large conference room at the New England Vegetable and Fruit Conference, or the size of many small churches. Whoa. I'll try to keep my introverted personality behind the mic here by myself and not think about an audience of that many people, while at the same time, I better be careful with the words that I say. Now, the podcasting industry is growing as a whole because Buzzsprout reported that over the last year in 2020, despite listening patterns being disrupted, there has been over 1 million new podcasts released into the world. Now, the top 1% of podcasts receive 3,076 downloads in the first 7 days. This podcast receives about 150 downloads within the first week. And that puts us, our show, in the top 25% of all podcasts. How does this even happen? This is just a measly little farm podcast. And, this is my own thinking, but I think a lot of that is, there's 1 million new podcasts out there, but they're launching with really no audience. They don't have an active audience. And I think a lot of podcasts are attributed to pod fade. When they get started, it's fun, they get going, and then they just kind of fade away. They don't last. So I think there's a lot of stagnant shows out there, and so therefore it's not hard if you're consistent and have an audience to share your episodes with to actually get some decent numbers, as we're doing here. Now, on one hand, 150 people or 150 downloads does not sound like hardly anything. Like if you have a YouTube video with 150 plays, you're like, yeah, that's pretty good, but it's not massive by any means. But to give you some more perspective, here they share that the top 50% of podcasts only receive 27 downloads the first week of their release. So most podcasts, 50% of podcasts launch an episode and have 27 downloads in the first 7 days. We're getting 150. So that is pretty impressive when you put it into perspective and start kind of ranking us on a scale like that. So apparently it's not that hard to be in the top 50th percentile of podcasting if you've got a good group of friends or a brand that's interested in audio content. Now, I wanted to give you a little bit of a perspective or backstory or my viewpoints on the podcast as the host thus far, a little over a year in. This is a 2-year project, and it got a little bit of a delayed start because some of the tech, the gear that I had ordered was on back ordered, so that delayed the project by a couple of months, but we finally got it off and running. And we launched hard and fast out of the gate, getting some really awesome farmers on the show right off the bat. And the goal for this podcast from the start was to do it at a super high quality, because personally, I have a hard time listening to podcasts where the audio quality is terrible, or people are calling in from phones and it's all crackly and you can't hear them, or it's unbalanced, and I just have a really low tolerance for that. So I wanted to put out something that's high bar, high quality, which is probably also part of the reason why a lot of podcasts never seem to get traction, is just because a lot of them are low quality. And unlike a YouTube video where it could be really good visuals or it could be really good audio, with a podcast, the sound of the production is all you have. So if it's not good, people are going to tune out really quickly. So I wanted to create a high quality episode, and in doing so means good equipment. And I really wanted to do this in person, which we did right off the bat really early on. And it was a lot of fun. I'd sit around a kitchen table at farms and talk about a couple of topics. I was originally going to just do like one topic with the farm. But then as we were sitting there, we're like, okay, well, we're 20 minutes, half an hour in. It's like, well, let's record 3 or 4 of these and then we can replicate them out. And so like the original scope of this project was to do an episode a month. That was the whole goal was to do really one farm a month. And I didn't realize as I was writing up the grant proposal that it makes a whole lot of sense to just record a whole bunch of content all in one sitting. So I very quickly pivoted and we did that. We recorded 3 to 4 episodes with every farm right off the bat, which allowed me to publish an episode every week right off the bat. I also mixed it up a little bit where I recorded a good handful of farms and I was able to kind of stagger. So one week it would be Footprint Farm, the next week it would be Last Resort, the week after that would be Small Axe Farm, whatever, and just to mix it up so it wasn't just back to back to back 4 weeks in a row of one farm. I don't know if that's good or bad, but the first few farms that I interviewed were collaborators on the project. They agreed to kind of give me some reflection as consumers of the podcast and provide some feedback with what they thought would be impactful for other growers, being the target audience there. So we decided to mix it up a bit. We mixed it up a bit and shared some really good episodes. We talked about, cat tunnels and practices like that, or tarping, a couple different times with different farms to get different perspectives, which I think is super cool. And then pretty quickly last spring, obviously, that in-person, round-the-table, face-to-face conversation became really challenging to do and honestly impossible to do as travel restrictions became imposed. So that really took a lot of the steam out of the show for me, because the drive behind this podcast was coming up from previous experience being on farms with my role at UVM Extension, doing farm visits and stuff, and hearing stories of farmers and hearing them get all excited about this piece of equipment or whatever practice it is that they were learning about this year. And they're like, oh, this is so cool. And they, every farmer gets excited about whatever it is that they're doing. And they're telling me about it. And I think, like, this is great, but then the conversation ends there, and they're doing so much awesome stuff that I wanted to capture that experience of an on-farm visit and what the farmers are learning about and discovering and what they're excited about, and share it with other farmers who would love to hear this other information. So that's like what drove me to this project. And so this summer, when farm visits stopped, that honestly took a lot of wind out of the sails for me, and imposed a lot of challenges on the podcast, because I really wanted to do it in person. I couldn't. And a lot of podcasts happen over the air, over the internet, which is fine. And I've done a few that way. And as I'm sure you can tell, the audio quality is not as good. And we've experimented with a few things about recording on their end and this end and mixing it together, which isn't a big deal. But carrying on a conversation like that over the phone just doesn't have the depth or connection that I want. It's definitely harder to carry the conversation going, and I'm sure you can tell that in the episodes. So hopefully here we'll get back into a little bit of a more normal routine. We'll still do a few more remote episodes, and I'm still going to record some stuff that we're putting out from Extension as further resources to help you out. But I just wanted to also, give you an update that's kind of where my viewpoint is that I really want to put out something really good, and it's hard to do something good over the air like this. So we're doing it, but obviously that threw a wrench into things. With that, I'm planning to continue this project and get a what they call as a no-cost extension. So there's funding in my budget to travel to farms all over the Northeast to sit in person and record these episodes, and that funding's still available. So I can extend the project and keep stuff rolling. So my hope is that later this summer, maybe later this fall, I can pick up the ball again, get on the mic face to face with people. We'll see how it goes, but that's a little bit of insight as to behind the scenes and a little bit of the future of this podcast, which, like most things, the future is unknown. It is a grant-funded project. That being said, I think it's really hitting a spot with the growers, and it's definitely getting a niche out there in this space and another perspective and another way of education. There's all kinds of interesting things going on in podcasting, and it's a new way of reaching people, even despite a lot of the listener patterns being disrupted. I mean, I guess in the podcast industry, myself included, that you don't have a commute, so you're not listening to podcasts. I think some of that may not have been as disrupted on farms because you're listening when you're seeding or when you're weeding. So I guess that's good. Maybe you haven't been as impacted as many of the others, but it's hard to listen to podcasts sometimes when you're always busy doing stuff and you don't always have the time to zone out. I like to listen to podcasts when I'm splitting firewood, but I'm not doing that every weekend. So lately I've been listening and taking a little more snowshoe hikes. But anyway, so what's the future of this podcast? Like I was saying, it's a grant-funded project, so technically it does have an end date, but there is benefit to doing this, and I think part of my role and extension will keep the show rolling to a certain extent. I've also had ideas of pivoting this into something different. I launched it as the Ag Engineering Podcast, but really the topics that we're talking about aren't specifically engineering. It's more just sustainable farming. And I think the conversation of sustainable farming is really where we like it to go, as opposed to engineering. So maybe the show takes a pivot. I'd like to get some more grant funding and keep it rolling with that side of an income stream. And this is where you come in. I really need your feedback because podcasting really is a one-way stream. I'm putting stuff out there and I hear very little back. I'm speaking to 150 people a week every time I launch a new episode, or 265 people, regular listeners. And I hear very little from that. You can't read the audience per se when you're listening on your phone out in the field. And I know you're listening on your phone, so it's hard to just pick it up and shoot an email or whatever. But this is where, if you could take the extra effort, and if you've learned something from this show and you find like you are a big fan and you want to keep this rolling and you want to thank me, or this has made a big impact on your life, the more anecdotes we have like that, saying not just we love this podcast, but I learned something from the show, or it makes me feel so connected with other growers, or it gives me motivation to keep farming, and it's a great way to pass the time. Like all that kind of stuff would be awesome to hear. So probably an email is the easiest way to get a hold of me. You can contact me via the page on the website, agengepodcast.com. But I've also included a new way which you can leave feedback for the episode, and that is you can leave me a voicemail. Right in the link in the description of this episode, you can leave me a voicemail. So you can click on that right from your phone, or you can do a voice memo too, and just send me a voicemail with your thoughts, where you'd like to see this podcast to go, what you like about it, what it means to you. If you've got any helpful tips or suggestions on how to make it better, I'd love to hear that as well. So this podcast only gets better as I hear from listeners, and I want to keep this show going. I hope that wasn't too rambly for you, and that sharing some of these stats were interesting. I always think behind the scenes stuff is neat, and podcasting is fun and unique. So hope that was a little bit enjoyable. We've got some more content coming out of our program here in Extension soon, and we'll be happy to share that. Like always, we're active on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube as well, so make sure you're following us on all those channels. And I'll wrap up there, and we'll be hearing from another farmer on the episode shortly, so stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe. Thanks for listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. So again, I'd love it if you left me a rating and a review right in your podcast player, and send me a voicemail right now from your phone via the link in the description. It's easy, and if you have something nice to say, I might even share it in a future episode. So As always, any relevant resources can be found in the show notes on our website at agengpodcast.com. That's AGENGPODCAST.com. Thanks for listening, and I hope you have a great day.